And the other part is what our next speaker is going to talk about. It's Mr. Burkhard Müller. He's a captain, a Marine captain, and he is now working with companies which are in crisis. And exactly at this point of crisis where there is danger of life and death. So he's dealing with a lot of people not being able to think anymore, going into panic, but still with the responsibility to save thousands and thousands of lives, like on a cruise ship, for example. I met him there. He was one of my favorite captains, also because he had both approaches. You have to train when you're in panic. No, you have to train before, so when you're in panic, you can still access what you need to do to save these lives. Also with this, when you train that, you have to have a human approach, because we don't learn when we feel under pressure. We don't learn when we are in panic. So welcome with me, Mr. Burkhard Müller, and he's talking about crisis management, how fear influences our brain, how to train for emergency, and how to use technology as a supporting feature. Welcome, Burkhard.
Thank you, Carola. Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. And I have to thank also the first speaker, Roman, because what he said matches already what I think. And perhaps you will find that also in my little presentation. I have prepared a little presentation I would like to show and comment within the next about 15 minutes. But again, it's really nice to hear that in a complete different context, like agriculture, we have the same view on ourselves and our human capabilities and limitations. So give me a second, I will start my presentation for you.
So let me, all the listeners, I ask you now to connect with yourselves. Who is doing personal development, you know what I mean, but for everyone who has not done that yet, now we're going into something. Imagine there's a crisis. I don't know which images you're going to use, but I just use mine at the moment. It's really, there is something happened to a ship. You have to get everyone off board. It's maybe sinking, and believe me, there's panic. So what you do at home is, please connect with your feet to the earth, connect yourself, and just imagine a situation where you were really in fear and maybe panicking. And then get this input. Burkhard, it's yours.
Yeah, thank you, Carola. As you said, I'm a master mariner, I'm an active captain, and I still work at sea, but I also work shoreside. I'm working since 4 years as management consultant, and I have specialized also in risk and crisis management consultancy. And why did I do that? Of course, the coronavirus pandemic is one of the triggers of the last year, actually, that also has driven my attention more to this area of the business. Otherwise, I was busy in providing training, simulator training, ship handling training, where we put people in a virtual working environment and try to give them a working task which is very close to their reality. And it's really amazing to see how people behave in a simulator, which is actually just technology-driven computer and screens and all this stuff. However, we put ourselves so soon in a real situation that we can train performance, that we can train our own ability to deal with unexpected situations like it would happen in reality. And that matches very nicely together with what I'm doing now. So give me a few minutes. I would like to give you a tour, about 15 minutes, about crisis management. What happens to us? How can we deal with this kind of unexpected situations? And how can we come around our limitations which kick in when stress really takes a grip on us, on our brains? So, as I said, I worked 17 years at sea, and I've worked for many different companies. And the basic experiences I would share in the first place is that really one of the keys for companies to really be sustainable, successful in the business is that they are able to think further ahead as just to the financial goals. Senior or executive management of companies needs to be able to be strategic, look ahead, look perhaps a few years ahead where your company or yourself you might be in a couple of years. And the other element is look what may happen, what may hamper your way to that point. And if you do this, and if you don't do that alone, if you do that together with your colleagues, with your employees, with your team around you, you will find risks and you will find situations where you need to be prepared for. And that's the other really basic experience I have gained over the last 30 years of my professional life. And this is that sustainable success in leadership comes from the really deep understanding. It is always the people who we are working with, who contribute, who make our company, our business successful. It's not the product. It's not the market. It's not technology. It's people. And we need to understand that. And we need to motivate them, to inspire them, and to keep them with us, and to really make use of their loyalty. And then we are able to run our business on a long term. Any kind of uncomfortable situation where we pushed out of our comfort zone within a second changes life, and it changes dramatically in our brain. Let's have a look. Let's put it to a more extreme. What happens to an airline pilot in his cockpit if he loses all engines immediately after takeoff, like Chesley Sullenberger with the Airbus leaving from New York? What happens to you as a captain on a ship's command bridge, losing propulsion and steering by a total power failure, the so-called blackout? And the bad weather causes you to drift with your vessel towards a rocky coast. Is that a dramatic story? No, it's not. It's reality. Perhaps you remember. It was the Viking Sky in March 2019. She suffered exactly that, a total power failure. She lost power, no propulsion, no steering, and she was drifting towards the Norwegian coast. Or let's drive it to the worst. Try to imagine that you are somewhere there in this kind of wagons or on that ship which is going to sink, and you are trapped. It happens like that. Of course, you are scared, you are shocked, you feel the pressure. The time is ticking, but you don't know what to do because your brain is frozen. Does any one of you know this feeling? I know it. I know it exactly because it happened several times to me. It happened in some situations at sea, but it also happened when I was working as a crisis manager for a shoreside shipping company, and when the call of a captain comes in to me and he told me what happens to his ship. So believe me, it changes your life substantially. Let's look into the detail, what really happens to us. And this is the result of research and development and the analytic work of safety experts around the globe from various industries. They have found out what does stress do to our cognitive performance, to our brain efficiency. So if we look here to the left side, we are hanging around a little bit bored. So our brain is not activated. We are feeling bored. We don't pay attention to the things around us. And our performance is, of course, very low. But then something changes, perhaps on a ship, the traffic around you, or you get a question, you get a request in a VHF call, or if you're in a management context in a shoreside company, you get a call from your boss, he asks you a question and you have half an hour time to come back with a report about that. So you get activated. So, and your performance increases. And somewhere here, you reach your optimum. your cognitive performance reaches the optimum. Driven by demands, by workload you have to deal with, but your capabilities are still good enough to deal with that. That increases your performance efficiency. However, if situations like these or that kick in, then you end up here. You become overloaded. And what happens to your brain is you suffer from a so-called IQ dropout, IQ dump, or psychologists also call it spontaneous incompetence. That means in this situation, you are overloaded by the demands, by time pressure, by a situation, and your own capabilities, your cognitive capacity is not good enough to deal with this situation. And this is not a nice feeling, I can tell you. Let's go to a bit more details. I've seen in the speaker round, we have a psychology specialist. I hope I don't tell bullshit now, but this is what I've written, what I've read in books written by psychologists. How does our brain work, and why do we lose the ability of logic thinking? Because our brain is divided in these two parts. It's the long-term memory, the so-called hard disk, and it's our short-term, our working memory, the CPU, so to say. In our long-term memory, we have a lot of nice descriptions. We have memories about situations we have experienced. But the more important part is this one here. We have also stored in our long-term memory what we have learned. We have learned as a kid how to behave, how to eat without creating a mess. This is stored in our long-term memory. We have learned to drive a bicycle or a car, and we have learned to deal with a lot of situations, and this is all sitting in our long-term memory, in our hard disk, and it's available. But only if our CPU is working, our short-term memory gets access to these stored memories, to these stored learning elements, to get them back out, to take it into action. But if I ask you now to remember a 10-digit telephone number and to repeat it without a failure, only a few of us are able. Most of us, we are unable. Because our short-term memory is not really a memory which is prepared to hold information for a long time. That's the reason why we call it short-term memory. But we need this. We need the CPU to get access to all the stuff we have learned and which is available to us to deal with unexpected situations. And that's the point. That's the bottleneck here. The CPU is the bottleneck. We can initiate sequential action only at this point. But what if there's no access to these actions we have stored in our memory? Or we don't find a useful action here because the situation is completely new to us. We don't find a matching learning or a matching activity memory in our long-term memory, then we are, so to say, lost. And that's the reason why we feel unable to deal with these kind of situations. Safety experts, psychologists have worked on this item for many, many years, for decades. And these situations, the only thing is that we follow a track of pre-planned and documented action. And you know what we are talking about. We talk about checklists. So what we find here on these checklists is really well thought through, is well considered by perhaps experts, by a team of professional people. So the content and the sequence of these actions is really well considered, well documented. And we just pull this checklist and help ourselves really to step ahead to deal with a situation which makes our brain frozen. And working with checklists is nowadays, it's so common in all safety critical industries and all safety critical businesses that they are also used to manage standard operating procedures. Like in an aircraft cockpit, to prepare for landing, you just use a checklist to make sure that you don't omit or miss an item which is needed to make a safe landing. Yeah, and this is the effect of stress. This is what drains our mental energy to stay strong, to deal with unexpected situations, with crisis situations. However, there's a way out. And that's training. Let's go back to our curve, to this performance over workload curve. The good stuff is that by training and experience, we can move this curve to the right. That means that the moment when we reach our optimum comes in later. We are able to deal with much higher workloads. And the moment when we are falling over the edge, so to say, that we are dropping down to our spontaneous incompetence in our brain capacity and our performance efficiency comes in later. And that's simply the effect of training and experience. Do it again and again and again, and you get familiar with these situations. And this will result in what we see here on this little picture. We increase familiarity with certain situations, even if it is just a simulation of an emergency. However, we put ourselves in our behavior modes, in our behavior pattern, from knowledge-based behavior to skill-based behavior. It's like that. It's like driving a car. May I ask you, all of you, or perhaps most of you, are driving a car. Do you still think about what to do next if you drive a car? I believe not, because we have practiced it so often that we do this task as a skill-based behavior. And the fantastic outcome of this is that the error rate of our brain is much, much less. If we are in situations where we have low familiarity, we are overwhelmed by the situation, it needs our full attention to deal with it, our error rate is almost 1 out of 2. If we are moving ourselves, to a skill-based behavior pattern, the error rate drops down to 1 out of 10,000. Isn't that great? So, coming towards the end of my little presentation, where do we want to be, I ask you? Do we want to feel lost in space, overwhelmed by emotions, or shocked? Or do we rely on computers, hoping that somewhere artificial intelligence will solve our problems? Or do we want to be prepared? Do we want to feel confident in our own capability? Do we want to feel confident and trust the people around us, the network around us, because we know they have gone the same way through, because we have trained together, we have simulated things together, and we feel prepared also for unexpected situations? I think, yes, that's the way we want to be. So how can we do this? It's just a few basic statements. Of course, that's not all, but the basic I would like to address is think ahead. Companies, management, responsible leaders, think ahead. Try to think ahead as much as you can. Simulate for yourself and your team what may happen in the future, when unexpected changes, when risks grab your business. And then try to find ways how to manage, how to come around these scenarios which are relevant for your business. When you have found this, and you can do that again and again, and nothing is perfect, and the more often you do it, perhaps you will do it even better. But the results of that, please document. Put it somewhere in plans, put it into procedures, and then implement these procedures, and then train, train, train. There's no way around. You have to train it for yourself, you have to train it for your team. And if you do this, you are already grown together to deal with situations, and then you see it really as a chance rather than a challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your attention. And yeah, if we have questions, I'm happy to answer them.